An Amish woman kneels in a garden plot smaller than a car, pressing a clay pot into dark soil with her hands. Tomato plants heavy with fruit surround her. No drip lines run between the rows, no sprinkler heads, no hose connections emerge from the soil's surface. Just clay and soil and fruit in a space the size of a suburban driveway. A close-up of the soil around the base of a pepper plant shows it dark and moist 2 inches down, with a dry surface above it, as if the water arrived from below rather than from above. Rows of squash and melon grow dense and heavy in a small walled garden, with no irrigation hardware visible above ground. A farmer's hands pour water into a buried clay neck, barely visible between 2 plants. A family sits at a harvest table with more food than they can finish, pulled from a plot that took less water than a lawn sprinkler uses in an afternoon. This is not a system that requires infrastructure. It does not require electricity. It does not require a water bill, a pressure regulator, a filter, a drip emitter, or a hardware store run after every freeze. It requires a clay pot, a hole in the ground, and a basic understanding of how water moves through soil. Farmers in China, North Africa, Iran, Pakistan, India, Mexico, and the American Southwest had that understanding 4,000 years before the first irrigation catalog was printed. The Amish never lost it. What happened to the rest of American agriculture is documented. The dates are specific. The names are on the legislation. Water moves from areas of high concentration to low. This is not an agricultural principle. It is a physics fact. The same principle that makes a paper towel absorb a spill, the same one that pulls moisture through a clay flower pot left sitting in a saucer. When a porous clay vessel filled with water is buried in dry soil, the water does not pour out in a stream. It seeps out at the rate the surrounding soil pulls it. When a plant root finds that vessel and wraps around its exterior, something more precise occurs. The plant itself controls the flow. A thirsty plant in hot, dry soil pulls water through the clay faster. A plant in wet soil after rain reduces the pull, the flow slows or stops entirely. No timer, no sensor, no pump, no electricity. One buried clay pot in dry ground, and the plant irrigates itself at precisely the rate its own biology demands. That is the entire mechanism. State that again because it matters. The plant controls the flow. Not a pressure regulator, not a drip emitter set to a schedule. The plant. This mechanism was first documented in Chinese agricultural texts approximately 2,000 years ago. The technique itself predates that written record by at least another 2,000 years, evidence of use going back 4,000 years, documented in the Ecomano Research Review and confirmed by the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. The system has been documented across China, North Africa, Iran, Pakistan, India, Mexico, Brazil, and the American Southwest, where indigenous peoples used it and Spanish settlers formalized it in colonial times. The Amish of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio, use versions of this system in their integrated growing operations today, and have never stopped. In June of 1947, the United States Congress enacted the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, the first national framework for pesticide registration in American history, administered by the USDA, which the Congressional Research Service documents as the foundation of modern chemical agriculture policy. 2 years before that, in 1945, the American government had begun converting surplus military ammonium nitrate, manufactured for explosives during World War II, into synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, creating the purchase-dependent agricultural system that made the $6 clay pot economically invisible. This video will explain the exact mechanics of the ALA system, the documented yield studies that prove it outperforms modern drip irrigation in water efficiency, the specific post-war policy chain that removed it from American agriculture, and the precise materials and steps to build it for under $50 in any backyard. Stay to the end. The last section is the one you plant. The clay vessel buried in the ground has a name that has been used for 2,000 documented years. It is called an olla, the Spanish term for pot or jar, applied to the unglazed clay irrigation vessel that has been pressed into soil on every continent where food grows in dry conditions. Unglazed clay is porous at a microscopic level, fired enough to hold water, but not fired enough to be watertight. That specific porosity is the technology. The vessel holds water, the soil pulls it, the plant controls the rate. A single buried olla of 8 inches can supply the water needs of 4 to 6 surrounding plants for days without refilling, the exact interval depending on temperature, soil type, and crop water demand. In the Amish gardens of Lancaster County, clay vessels and subsurface moisture management have been part of integrated growing systems for generations, nested alongside crop rotation, animal manure composting, heirloom seed banks, and draft horse cultivation. The Amish farmer does not run a drip line. She does not set a timer. She fills the pots when they are low, which in most conditions means every 2 to 4 days, and the garden produces through drought conditions that would stress a conventionally irrigated plot. Set that against the USDA Economic Research Service's documented figure for American household food spending, approximately $1,100 per month for a family of 4 in 2024, and let the arithmetic sit without embellishment. Think about what 97% water savings means for a family's water bill. The Amish farmer does not weed at the rate a conventionally irrigated gardener weeds, and here is why that is the most important economic fact in this video. The Ola system does 3 things simultaneously that no above-ground irrigation can replicate. The first is precision delivery. Water from the Ola goes directly to the root zone with 0 surface evaporation. Curtis Smith of New Mexico State University Cooperative Extension, a horticulture specialist, states that Olia irrigation technology is equal to or slightly superior to drip irrigation precisely because the water goes straight to the plant and none is lost to the surface. Drip irrigation, even well-designed drip irrigation, loses water to surface evaporation and to lateral movement away from root zones. The Ola loses none. The root finds the pot and takes what it needs, and nothing moves to the surface where the sun can remove it. The second function is weed suppression through surface dryness. When the soil surface stays dry, because all the moisture is being delivered below ground, weed seeds on the soil surface cannot germinate at the rate they would in a conventionally irrigated bed. A study documented in the Ecomena Research Review found that dry weight of weeds was 62 kilograms per hectare in Ola irrigated plots, compared to 465 kilograms per hectare with basin irrigation. That is not a modest reduction. That is a 7-fold decrease in weed pressure from a single change in irrigation method. The Amish farmer running an Ola garden is not pulling weeds for 2 hours every morning. She is tending crops. The labor equation changes entirely. The third function is root zone moisture stability. Conventional irrigation, whether surface watering, drip, or sprinkler, creates wet and dry cycles. Wet after watering, progressively drier until the next cycle. Those cycles stress plants in ways that show up in food quality. Bitterness in lettuce and greens correlates with moisture stress. Cracking in tomatoes and melons correlates with irregular watering. The Ola eliminates the cycle. The root zone stays at a consistent moisture level because the plant is continuously drawing exactly what it needs. The food that comes out of an Ola garden does not crack, does not bolt from stress, does not turn bitter in dry weeks. This is why the Amish do not buy the same replacement vegetable seedlings every dry July that a conventional gardener does. The system is stable in conditions that destabilize everything above ground. Stay with the 1945 timeline for 1 more year. That is where the architecture closes. When World War II ended, the American government faced a documented surplus problem. Ammonium nitrate had been manufactured in enormous quantities during the war as the explosive component of military ordnance. The conversion documented by Utah State University food history researchers was direct. The surplus became nitrogen fertilizer, and that fertilizer entered the American agricultural market in force after 1945. As former explosives manufacturing infrastructure was repurposed for crop production. This was not a gradual transition. It was a structural redirection of industrial capacity. The same factories and the same chemical compounds were applied to farmland rather than to munitions. By October of 1945, DDT, whose insecticidal action had been discovered by Swiss chemist Paul Hermann Müller in 1939 and used by Allied forces to control insect-borne disease in the second half of the war, was available for public sale in the United States. Müller would receive the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1948 for that discovery. The chemical architecture of post-war American agriculture was not assembled over decades. It was assembled in approximately 2 years. Monsanto had been founded in 1901 as a chemical company and was among the top 10 United States chemical companies from the 1940s onward. Following the war, Monsanto was among the companies that championed the use of chemical pesticides in agriculture, a market that had just been validated at industrial scale by wartime use. The Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, Public Law 8104, approved June 25, 1947, by the 80th United States Congress, established the first national pesticide registration framework in American history. The Congressional Research Service documents that the original 1947 version of FIFRA required product registration by the USDA prior to sale or distribution and established labeling provisions for pesticides moving in interstate commerce. USDA administered FIFRA from its inception until administration was transferred to the newly formed Environmental Protection Agency in 1970. The Congressional Research Service notes that FIFRA's initial intent was described as protecting farmers by requiring accurate labeling, enabling informed choices about product effectiveness. What it also did, structurally, was institutionalize chemical inputs as the baseline assumption of American agricultural practice, in the same 2-year window in which surplus explosives had become fertilizer and wartime pesticides had become retail products. The ancient systems that required no purchased inputs received no institutional promotion in the new framework, no extension service emphasis, no place in the post-war agricultural training curriculum that was being redesigned around the chemical model. The ALA did not disappear because it failed. It disappeared because the infrastructure built around it was dismantled and replaced by an infrastructure that required purchasing something. The study number is documented. 2 countries, different crops, same result. A 2013 study in Kenya, cited in the Ecomine Research Review with reference to the Global Journal of Science Frontier Research, found that OLA irrigation saved 97.1% of applied water for maize and 97.8% for applied water for tomatoes, compared to furrow irrigation. The yield increase from the OLA plots was 32.2% for maize and 43.7% for tomatoes. Read those numbers again. 97% water reduction, 43% yield increase. Not a trade-off, not a conservation measure that costs productivity. A productivity increase achieved by using less than 3% of the water. A study in India found that Ola irrigated melon produced 25 tons per hectare using only 2 centimeters of irrigation water, compared to 33 tons per hectare using 26 centimeters with flood irrigation. The Ola plot produced 76% of the yield of a flood-irrigated plot, while using less than 8% of the water. A second study in India documented tomato yields of 27 tons per hectare using saline irrigation water with an electrical conductivity of 10.2 millimoles per centimeter, water too salty for conventional irrigation that would have damaged or killed a conventionally irrigated crop. The ALA system, because it delivers water directly to the root zone and the plant controls uptake, can use marginally saline water sources that conventional systems cannot. These are not anecdotal reports from individual farms. They are published, peer-reviewed, documented yield studies from multiple countries on multiple continents across multiple decades. The University of Arizona Cooperative Extension documents that Ollier irrigation saves between 60 and 70% of water compared to conventional watering can irrigation in home garden contexts. The system does not match modern drip irrigation in water efficiency. It outperforms it. The clay pot costs $6. The drip system it outperforms costs several hundred. Here is the practical construction. Use 1 unglazed terracotta pot from any garden supply or home improvement store. 8 inches is a practical size for a home garden bed. Seal 2 pots together at the drainage holes with food-grade silicone to create a closed vessel with only the neck opening remaining. Bury the sealed pair in the garden bed with the neck protruding 2 inches above the soil surface. Plant food crops at a radius of 12 to 18 inches from the neck. Tomatoes, squash, melons, peppers, and chilies all perform well. These are crops with fibrous roots that will find the vessel and encircle the clay. Fill the neck with water. In normal summer conditions, the pot will require refilling every 2 to 4 days. In cooler or more humid conditions, refill less frequently. The system requires no moving parts, no electricity, no pressurized water, no filter, and no emitter that can clog. A family garden of 400 square feet, roughly the size of a 2-car driveway, requires 6 to 8 pots at a total materials cost of under $50. In areas with hard winter freezes, the pots need to be dug up in late fall to prevent cracking. This is a 20-minute task that the Amish incorporate into standard seasonal garden closed down. That is the entire system, not a simplified version of it, the entire thing. The same system is documented in Chinese agricultural texts 2,000 years ago, used in Iranian and North African dryland farming for 4,000 years, and still operating in Amish gardens in Lancaster County and Holmes County today. The United Nations designated the Aztec version of this system a globally important agricultural heritage system in 2018, not historically significant, globally important right now. The Chinampa, the raised field island system built in the shallow lake beds of the Valley of Mexico, documented in the World History Encyclopedia and in the agricultural heritage literature, represents the most sophisticated integration of water management and food production in the pre-industrial world. Chinampas are still in use in Xochimilco today. The word Chinampa derives from the Nahuatl term Chinamitl, meaning a fence made of plants. These were human-made rectangular islands woven from reeds and stakes, maintained by farmers on small household-scale plots, producing food continuously in a system so productive it supplied a city of hundreds of thousands from a lake bed. The Aztecs did not invent the Chinampa system, but were the first to develop it at large-scale cultivation. The United Nations designation in 2018 was not a historical award. It was a recognition that the system is still viable, still in use, and still among the most productive per-unit area food-growing systems documented anywhere on Earth. The first writing about Aula irrigation dates to approximately 2,000 years ago in a Chinese agricultural text. The technique itself predates that record by 2,000 years more. It arrived in the American Southwest through indigenous peoples who built their food systems in dry land conditions that modern drip irrigation struggles to serve, and through Spanish settlers who brought it formally to the colonial Southwest. The chemical agriculture system that institutionally replaced these methods beginning in 1945 is approximately 80 years old. The system it displaced is 40 centuries old. The Amish chose which one to keep, not because they are backward and not because they are unaware of the alternative, but because their theology does not permit dependence on purchased inputs they cannot produce themselves, and because the system that does not require purchased inputs has been outperforming the one that does for 4,000 documented years. The physics of how water moves through soil has not changed since the first Chinese farmer pressed a clay vessel into dry ground 2 millennia ago. What changed was not the physics. What changed was who benefited from selling you something to replace it. Drop your answer in the comments. What is the first crop you would plant around an Aula? 1 or 2 words. The people reading those comments are building gardens right now. The single most documented fact in this video, that Aula irrigation saved 97% of irrigation water in a 2013 Kenya study, while increasing crop yield by 43%, is the one most viewers will not believe until they pull up the source themselves. Share this video with one person who has a water bill and a backyard. The Kenya study citation is in the description. The Amish have also never called an exterminator in 200 years. The formula they use costs $1 and takes 5 minutes to apply. Stay for the next video. The pest control industry spent 30 years trying to remove it from circulation, and the reason they tried tells you exactly what it does to their revenue model.